KSN News at 6 begins now.
It was the biggest one I've ever felt. It's quite an eye-opener when you're sound asleep and you get that kind of rumble, that kind of shake.
Many of you felt it, a strong quake in Oklahoma that could be felt across much of Kansas. Good evening, I'm Craig Andrus. Thanks for joining us. One person in Oklahoma did receive a minor head injury when part of his fireplace toppled over in Pawnee, Oklahoma, near the epicenter of the quake. And while there were no injuries in Kansas, if you're like me, thousands of others, you woke this morning to the shaking from that strong earthquake. Now, the quake was 5.6 magnitude, centered about 9 miles northwest of Pawnee, Oklahoma. That's about 125 miles south and slightly east of Wichita, or about 55 miles straight west of Tulsa. There have been more than a half dozen aftershocks in the same area. The strongest one was a 3.6 that happened a couple of minutes just before 8 o'clock. Now, the cleanup process has begun in Pawnee after the earthquake caused widespread damage. Officials say this barn and a neighboring home caught fire and were destroyed. There was no other major damage reported. You can also see an old historic sandstone building also damaged. Part of the outer wall broken away and fallen onto the sidewalk. Residents in the town, meanwhile, are coming together, they say, to help shop owners clean up so they can reopen. Officials calling this quake unprecedented.
We've had a lot of earthquakes over the last couple of years, and they have been just single tremors, and boom, and it's gone. And right away you could tell this was something different.
Earthquake ties a record for the strongest in Oklahoma history. Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin says structural engineers are going around to assess the damage and to check the buildings as well. Members of the Department of Transportation out checking highways and bridges for damage as well. They say they only found very minor issues. Okay, and this is what the quake looked like here in Wichita. KSN viewer Dan sent us this video. If you look closely, you can see the water in the pool. It starts to move like little waves on the ocean. Another viewer, Ken Swarm, sending us this. He says he's lived in Wichita 30 years and he's never felt anything like he felt this morning.
It got pretty violent for a short period of time, and then you could feel it just continue on, shaking and shaking. This obviously was the most drastic earthquake we've had since I've lived here.
Ken even says the quake woke him up and he thought his house was falling apart, he says, because it was shaking so hard. He says he did get some minor damage, like some small cracks in the walls. Okay, the earthquake's strong enough. The city of Wichita has activated its emergency response plan team to look for damages. KSN's Chris Arnold is talking to the city. Joins us live now to see what kind of damage we have here. Chris.
Good evening, Craig. I can tell you that the city is really inspecting everything they can, even pillars like this, concrete pillars, looking for any cracks or any damage from this morning's earthquake. Now, I spoke with Alan King, the director of Public Works and Utilities here for the city of Wichita, and he says within 30 minutes of that earthquake, they had a response team deployed with about a dozen people scattered across the city looking for damage. So what did they find? So far, nothing major. They're looking at bridges, streets, and overpasses, as well as water and sewer mains. He says they even checked out City Hall from top to bottom, mainly focusing on the 14th floor, which is the top floor of the building where the HVAC units are, making sure nothing was affected up there. The good news, only minor damages with cracks in windows and non-load-bearing walls. But King says they have to look.
What we really do is we compare it to recent previous events, and if it's much bigger or much closer, that's the criteria that we use to go ahead and initiate our emergency response.
So what comes next? King tells me that some of the response team have finished up their initial assessments today. Others will continue to do inspections throughout the holiday weekend. The hope is that they'll have a full report of all the damage from the earthquake by Tuesday. Live in downtown Wichita, Chris Arnold, KSN News.
Thank you, Chris. Many of you, our viewers, emailing us this morning, telling us that you did feel the earthquake. We heard from hundreds of viewers, including some in Raymond in Rice County. Also Lakin, that is west of Garden City, and even Belleville. That's very near the Nebraska state line. Well, you aren't the only ones, by the way. Here's a look. Did you feel it map provided by the USGS? People from different states felt it, including Kansas City, Missouri, along with Dallas to the south, even Des Moines, Iowa to the north. Because of this morning's earthquakes, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission shut down dozens of wastewater disposal wells near the epicenter. They say 37 wells must shut down within 10 days. They say a sudden shutdown could cause another earthquake. A commission spokesman, that is, says that the wells within 725 square miles have to be shut down because of scientific links, they say, between an increase in earthquakes and the increase of underground water disposal from the oil and gas industry. They previously asked producers to reduce their disposal volumes. Number of magnitude of 3.0 or greater earthquakes has increased in Oklahoma. There were only about a dozen in 2012, but last year there were more than 900. Okay, beautiful start to your Labor Day weekend, but we have some storms out there. Laura, what's happening?
That's right. I've been watching the storms in northwest Kansas bubble up through the afternoon. Now we have a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings in effect. Moving closer, the bulk of the activity, again, as I mentioned, just north of I-70, and we just have 3 cells that we need to watch for. Moving closer on the storm, these are moving to the north and east. The one that we are keeping an eye on is just north of Hoxie and moving to the north and east. We'll say at a fast pace, anywhere between 20 and 25 miles per hour. I put a track on the storm to show you the communities that are involved, say 26 miles per hour. So this will continue over open country, but if you're in Norton, you want to be on guard for this storm. We're looking at hail and even some gusty winds. As far as the other storm that we need to watch is now just south of McCook. So that's actually good news, but it will continue on that northeast path that I mentioned before with this storm moving to the north. We'll say about 24 miles per hour. So in 17 minutes, arriving in Indianola. So we'll need to watch these storms as we go through the rest of the evening. Hail and wind, the 2 primary severe weather threats. I'll keep an eye on these and I'll bring you more updates as needed.
We are hearing for the first time from the family whose son was shot and killed by a Sedgwick County deputy. Early Thursday morning, a little after 1, 18-year-old Caleb Douglas was pulled over after a deputy thought he was driving impaired. Caleb pointed a gun at the deputy, so the deputy fired his gun in self-defense. Family says Caleb was a caring, loving soul, but they acknowledge that his troubles were a concern. They say they're devastated that Caleb's own actions ended his life too soon. Families cooperating with the sheriff's office during this investigation. Per department policy, the officer has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a Kansas Bureau of Investigation. One man dead after being involved in an overnight moped accident. Police say it happened in the 1000 block of South Meridian shortly before 11. They say a 37-year-old man was driving a moped south on Meridian. When he crossed the center line, they say, that man then hit a Ford F-150 pickup. Victim transported to the hospital, where he later died. His name not being released, but the investigation is ongoing. An update to a story we brought you last night. Officials at Kansas Wolf Creek Nuclear Power Plant have identified the source of a water leak, and they are working to fix it. They say a cracked weld caused a small leak in the reactor cooling system. The plant is designed to contain leaks. They're working on a repair plan, but the nuclear plant will remain shut down through September. That is through the 24th for a scheduled maintenance outage. They will restart the plant at the end of that outage. The state mental hospital that's had staff shortage problems over the past few years has spent more money on overtime pay than any other state agency. Larned State Hospital paid its nearly 600 employees $3.8 million in overtime during fiscal year 2016 so far. That's nearly a quarter of the state's total overtime costs for the year. The next closest was KDOT, Department of Transportation, spending a little more than $2 million. The interim director of the Department of Aging and Disability Services says overtime at Larned has been steadily falling, he claims, since he took over. We are getting our first look at a new school funding plan, but it continues to raise questions about whether the state spends enough on public education. This week, the governor said he's finally inviting dozens of groups to study school finance 18 months after he said work would begin immediately on a new school finance plan. A group of schools administrators is not waiting. They've been formulating a plan for the past 15 months themselves. That plan asks if the state is spending enough money to give our kids an adequate education. The school group plan would provide some base foundation aid, and that money would come from local property taxes. So far, the governor's office has not released any plan for how schools will be financed. That select group has been invited to bring their ideas to the table. Those not invited will have to email the state their ideas. Hurricane Herman has been downgraded now to a tropical storm, but it's still dumping heavy rains throughout the mid-Atlantic. As we know, the storm has claimed the lives of 2 people now, a homeless man in Florida hit by a tree and a truck driver in Virginia whose semi was toppled by the wind. It's also damaged properties and has left hundreds of thousands without power, but it's still not done. Some computer models show the storm could stall offshore in the Atlantic, then gain strength and slam back into the eastern seaboard, so residents and tourists are preparing for what's to come.
We're putting extra lines on the boats and stuff like that. And some of the guys are moving their boats up to a cove where it's a little bit safer.
Tropical storm warning has been issued for New York City and other parts of the Northeast. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has declared a state of emergency for several counties along Jersey Shore. In Hawaii, Hurricane Lester bringing heavy rain and rough waves to Hilo. That Category 2 hurricane currently moving northwest of the islands. A hurricane watch has been discontinued, but Lester's impact still being felt. Coastal areas, as you can see, feeling most of the impact, with east-facing shores getting up to 25-foot waves and some possible storm surges still. Forecasters expect Lester to weaken and eventually become a tropical storm, perhaps late tomorrow night. Well, still ahead here on KSN at 6. Kansas Jayhawks looking to start college football with a rare win, but who will be their starting quarterback? Eric has the answer coming up later in sports. But first, when we come back, Laura has a full check of your Labor Day weekend forecast.